The funeral director's clipboard clattered to the ground, his weathered hands trembling as he stared at the impossible sight before him. A massive Brahman bull, easily 1,200 pounds of muscle and bone, had somehow breached the iron gates of Hillcrest Cemetery and now stood motionless atop the small white coffin of 6-year-old Emma Rose McCarthy. Thunder wasn't grieving, he was alerting. Gasps rippled through the stunned mourners as the giant beast lowered his enormous head toward the casket, his characteristic hump casting a shadow over the delicate spray of wildflowers. Mrs. Henderson from the church choir stumbled backward into her husband's arms, while children pressed their faces against their parents' legs in wide-eyed terror. William Harrison stood frozen between the folding chairs, his black suit jacket forgotten in his white-knuckled grip as memories crashed over him. Emma's laughter echoing across the ranch just days ago, her small hand stroking Thunder's massive neck with fearless love. The bull's low, rumbling call wasn't the sound of an animal in distress. "Someone call animal control!" Pastor William shouted, his voice cracking with authority and panic. But why had Thunder traveled 15 miles to find a dead child? And what did the bull know that no one else could see? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 6 months earlier, the relentless Texas sun had beaten down mercilessly on the cracked earth of Harrison Ranch, where William "Bill" Harrison stood surveying his withering pastures with the grim resignation of a man watching his life's work slowly die. At 45, the former veterinarian carried the weight of accumulated losses in his stooped shoulders and prematurely graying temples. His wife, Sarah, in that terrible car accident 3 years ago. His thriving large animal practice lost to a malpractice lawsuit that wasn't even his fault. And now his 500-acre ranch teetering on the edge of foreclosure. The drought had stretched into its 4th month, transforming once green fields into a moonscape of dust and desperate cattle clustering around nearly empty water troughs. Feed costs had skyrocketed while cattle prices plummeted, creating a perfect storm that threatened to wash away everything Bill's grandfather had built from nothing back in 1952. The bank had already sent 2 notices, each more urgent than the last, demanding payment on loans that seemed to multiply like tumbleweeds in the scorching wind. In the center of this agricultural wasteland stood Thunder, Bill's prize Brahman bull, a magnificent specimen whose imposing presence commanded respect from every creature on the ranch. The 3-year-old giant weighed in at nearly 1,200 pounds of pure muscle and determination, his distinctive gray coat gleaming silver in the harsh sunlight, and his characteristic hump marking him as one of the finest breeding bulls in Central Texas. Worth $50,000 to the right buyer, Thunder represented Bill's only remaining asset of real value, and his last hope of keeping the ranch afloat through another season. But Thunder wasn't just livestock, he was a testament to redemption itself. Bill had rescued the bull 18 months ago from a neighboring ranch where an abusive owner had terrorized the animal with electric prods and cruel restraints, leaving Thunder scarred both physically and emotionally. Under Bill's patient care, the once aggressive bull had transformed into a gentle giant whose intelligence and surprising sensitivity had earned him a special place in the veterinarian's heart. The sound of tires on gravel announced the arrival of a white sedan bearing the seal of Texas Child Protective Services, kicking up a dust cloud that seemed to hang in the still air like an omen. Behind the wheel sat Mrs. Patricia Collins, a social worker whose kind eyes couldn't quite mask the weariness of someone who had seen too much human suffering. In the passenger seat, clutching a worn stuffed rabbit and staring out at the vast expanse of struggling ranch land, sat 6-year-old Emma Rose McCarthy, an orphan whose parents had perished in an oil rig explosion 8 months earlier, leaving her with no family willing to take on the responsibility of caring for a child with severe epilepsy. As the car pulled to a stop near the ranch house, Bill straightened his shoulders and walked toward what he hoped might be a new beginning for both of them. The August afternoon heat shimmered off the hood of Mrs. Collins's sedan as she opened the passenger door, revealing Emma Rose McCarthy for the first time. The 6-year-old emerged slowly, her honey blonde hair escaping from a hastily constructed ponytail, clutching her stuffed rabbit with the fierce determination of someone who had learned that everything could disappear without warning. Her oversized sundress, clearly a hand-me-down from some well-meaning donor, hung loosely on her small frame, but her eyes, bright green and startlingly alert, surveyed the ranch with the careful assessment of someone far older than her years. "Emma, honey, this is Mr. Harrison," Mrs. Collins said gently, her voice carrying the practiced warmth of someone accustomed to difficult introductions. "He's going to show us around his ranch, and maybe you'll decide you'd like to stay here for a while." Bill knelt down to Emma's eye level, his veterinarian's instincts recognizing the wariness of a creature that had been hurt before. "You can call me Bill," he said quietly. "I heard you like animals. Would you like to meet some of my cattle?" Emma nodded solemnly but remained close to Mrs. Collins as they walked toward the pasture. Bill explained the basics of ranch life, the morning feeding routines, the importance of water conservation during the drought, the way different cattle had different personalities just like people. Emma listened intently, asking surprisingly sophisticated questions about animal behavior that revealed an intelligence far beyond her chronological age. They had been walking for perhaps 20 minutes when Emma suddenly stopped mid-step, her small body going rigid with alarming swiftness. Mrs. Collins, experienced with Emma's medical condition, immediately recognized the warning signs and helped guide the child to sit on a nearby fence post. "It's okay, sweetheart," she murmured, checking her watch. "Just breathe." What happened next defied explanation. From across the pasture, Thunder raised his massive head from the water trough where he had been drinking, his ears pricked forward with sudden alertness. The bull's deep, resonant bellow echoed across the ranch as he began moving toward them with surprising speed for such a large animal, his hooves thundering against the hard-packed earth. "Get back!" Bill shouted, his protective instincts flaring as he positioned himself between the approaching bull and the vulnerable child. But Thunder wasn't charging. He was responding to something only he could perceive. The seizure hit Emma with devastating force, her small body convulsing as electrical storms raged through her developing brain. Mrs. Collins supported her carefully, timing the episode while Bill watched in stunned amazement as Thunder approached the fence line and began a series of low, rhythmic vocalizations, unlike anything he had ever heard from the bull before. For 8 agonizing minutes, Emma's body betrayed her while Thunder maintained his vigil at the fence, his massive presence somehow both imposing and protective. When the seizure finally subsided, leaving Emma exhausted but conscious, Thunder's vocalizations ceased as abruptly as they had begun, and the bull returned to his water trough as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. "That was unusual," Mrs. Collins observed, helping Emma sip from a water bottle she always carried. "The seizure wasn't as severe as they usually are. Emma, honey, how do you feel?" Emma's gaze drifted to Thunder, who was now grazing peacefully in the distance. "He was singing to me," she said softly, her voice still weak from the episode. Like a lullaby, but deeper. Bill felt a chill, despite the oppressive heat. In his years as a veterinarian, he had witnessed remarkable instances of animal intuition. Dogs detecting cancer before medical equipment, horses refusing to enter unstable barns, cats disappearing before earthquakes. But what he had just observed seemed to transcend mere animal instinct. "Has she had any seizures today?" Bill asked Mrs. Collins as they helped Emma back to the ranch house. 2 this morning before we left Austin," Mrs. Collins replied, her professional mask slipping to reveal genuine concern. "They're becoming more frequent, and the medications aren't as effective as they used to be. The specialists say she needs more intensive monitoring, but the insurance situation is—" She trailed off, clearly reluctant to discuss financial realities in front of Emma. As they reached the covered porch of the ranch house, Emma turned to look back at Thunder one more time. The bull had positioned himself at the fence closest to the house, his intelligent eyes fixed on their small group. "Can I stay here?" Emma asked Bill directly, bypassing Mrs. Collins entirely. "I think Thunder likes me." Bill looked from the hopeful child to the protective bull and felt something shift in his chest. A recognition that perhaps this unlikely pairing might offer salvation for both the ranch and the little girl who needed a place to belong. 3 weeks had passed since Emma's arrival at Harrison Ranch, and the rhythm of their new life together had begun to establish itself like the steady cadence of Thunder's hoofbeats across the pasture. Each morning, Bill would find Emma sitting on the porch steps, dressed and ready for the day, watching the sunrise paint the Texas sky in shades of amber and rose, while Thunder grazed nearby, his massive form silhouetted against the awakening landscape. The seizures had not stopped. If anything, they seemed to be increasing in both frequency and intensity, leaving Emma exhausted and Bill increasingly worried about the mounting medical bills that arrived with each emergency room visit. But something extraordinary was happening that challenged everything Bill thought he understood about animal behavior and medical science. Thunder had become Emma's early warning system. It started with subtle changes in the bull's demeanor that Bill initially attributed to coincidence. Thunder would lift his head from grazing and focus intently on Emma's location, his ears pricked forward and his body tense with alertness. Within minutes, sometimes as many as 5, never fewer than 2, Emma would experience the telltale aura that preceded her seizures. At first, Bill dismissed these observations as the desperate pattern-seeking of a man trying to find hope in hopeless circumstances. But the pattern held, day after day, with uncanny consistency. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the local veterinarian who had taken over much of Bill's former client base, witnessed one of these episodes during a routine visit to check on Thunder's health. She was examining the bull's eyes when he suddenly became agitated, snorting and pacing along the fence line nearest to the house where Emma was playing. "That's unusual behavior for him," Dr. Mitchell observed, her professional curiosity piqued. "Thunder's typically one of the calmest bulls I've ever worked with." Before Bill could respond, Emma's voice carried across the yard. "Bill, I need to sit down now." She was already making her way to the designated safe spot they had established on the soft grass beneath the old oak tree, moving with the practiced urgency of someone who had learned to read her body's warning signals. Dr. Mitchell watched in fascination as Thunder positioned himself at the fence closest to Emma, his massive body creating a barrier between her and the rest of the world. When the seizure struck, lasting nearly 6 minutes, Thunder remained motionless, his deep, rumbling vocalizations providing a steady counterpoint to Emma's distress. "Bill," Dr. Mitchell said quietly as they waited for the episode to pass, "I've read about this phenomenon in veterinary journals. Some animals have demonstrated the ability to detect seizures before they occur. Dogs, mostly, but there have been documented cases with horses and even cats. The theory is that they can sense subtle changes in body chemistry or electrical activity that humans can't perceive." Bill felt a mixture of vindication and trepidation at having his observations validated by someone with Dr. Mitchell's expertise. Is it possible to train this behavior, to make it more reliable? "The remarkable thing is that Thunder seems to have developed this ability naturally," Dr. Mitchell replied, making notes in her ever-present notebook. "Most seizure-alert animals require months of specialized training. This suggests an extraordinary level of sensitivity and intelligence." But their growing understanding of Thunder's abilities was overshadowed by Emma's deteriorating condition. The seizures were lasting longer, requiring more frequent use of emergency medications and leaving her increasingly weak and confused during the recovery periods. The nearest pediatric neurologist was in Austin, 3 hours away, and their insurance company had denied coverage for the specialized testing Emma desperately needed. The financial pressure was becoming unbearable. Bill had already sold 2 parcels of land to cover Emma's medical expenses, and the bank was growing increasingly impatient about the overdue mortgage payments. The irony wasn't lost on him that Thunder, the animal providing such comfort and protection to Emma, was also worth enough money to solve their immediate financial crisis. Everything changed on a sweltering Thursday afternoon when Emma suffered her most severe seizure to date while they were visiting the Austin County Fair. Bill had been reluctant to take her to such a crowded, stimulating environment, but Emma had begged to see the livestock competitions, and her excitement had been impossible to resist. They were standing near the Brahman bull exhibition when Thunder, who had been loaded into the trailer for the day trip, began bellowing from the parking area with an intensity that drew stares from fairgoers hundreds of yards away. Bill recognized the urgency in Thunder's vocalizations and immediately began scanning for Emma, finding her near the ring where young 4-H members were showing their animals. "Emma!" he called, but she was already sinking to her knees, her small hands pressed against her temples as the familiar aura swept over her. What happened next would be seared into Bill's memory forever. Thunder, somehow sensing the severity of what was coming, broke through the aluminum rail of his trailer with a force that bent metal and shattered wood. The massive bull charged through the fairgrounds, scattering visitors and overturning food stands in his desperate rush to reach Emma. By the time Thunder arrived at Emma's side, she was deep in the throes of a seizure that would last nearly 12 minutes, longer than any she had experienced before. The bull positioned his enormous body protectively over her small form, his presence somehow managing to keep the panicked crowd at a safe distance while providing a barrier against the chaos surrounding them. Dr. Marcus Caldwell, the pediatric emergency physician who responded to the 911 call, arrived to find what he would later describe as the most disturbing scene of his 15-year career: a child in life-threatening medical crisis being guarded by a massive, potentially dangerous animal that refused to allow medical personnel to approach. "Get that animal away from her immediately," Dr. Caldwell commanded, his voice sharp with authority and something that sounded remarkably like fear. Dr. Marcus Caldwell's reaction to Thunder's protective stance over Emma was immediate and visceral, his face draining of color as he backed away from the massive bull with trembling hands. The sight of the Brahman's imposing form triggered memories he had spent 15 years trying to suppress. Memories of his 8-year-old son, Tommy, lying broken and lifeless beneath the hooves of a bull that had seemed gentle until that terrible moment when everything changed forever. "I said get that animal away from the child," Caldwell shouted again, his medical authority warring with barely controlled panic. "Someone call animal control immediately. This is exactly the kind of situation that gets children killed." Bill positioned himself between the doctor and Thunder, his own protective instincts flaring as he recognized the fear masquerading as professional concern in Caldwell's voice. "Doctor, please, Thunder isn't aggressive. He's protecting Emma. This bull has been alerting to her seizures for weeks now. He somehow knows when they're coming." "That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard," Caldwell snapped, pulling out his radio to request backup. "Bulls are unpredictable, dangerous animals, especially around sick children. I've seen what they can do." His voice cracked slightly on the last words, revealing depths of trauma that had nothing to do with medical protocol. The standoff might have continued indefinitely, but Emma's seizure was showing no signs of subsiding. 12 minutes had passed, well beyond the point where emergency medication should have been administered. Dr. Mitchell, who had followed them to the fair, stepped forward with quiet authority. "Dr. Caldwell, I'm Sarah Mitchell, large animal veterinarian. This bull has demonstrated remarkable sensitivity to this child's medical condition. If you'll allow me to guide Thunder away slowly, you can provide the care Emma needs without forcing a dangerous confrontation." Caldwell's relief at finding a solution that didn't require him to approach the bull was palpable, though he attempted to mask it with professional irritation. "Fine, but I want that animal removed from the fairgrounds immediately. And I'll be filing a report with Child Protective Services about this incident. No child should be exposed to this kind of danger." As Dr. Mitchell carefully led Thunder away, speaking to him in the calm, authoritative tone that large animals responded to, Caldwell finally was able to approach Emma. His medical skills, whatever his personal demons, were genuine and skilled. He quickly administered the emergency medication that stopped the seizure and began the process of stabilizing her condition for transport to the hospital. But the damage was done. Within hours of arriving at Austin General Hospital, where Caldwell served as head of pediatric emergency medicine, a cascade of official interventions began that would tear apart the fragile stability Bill and Emma had built together. Child Protective Services received Caldwell's report within the hour, describing Emma's exposure to an uncontrolled, dangerous animal and raising questions about Bill's judgment and fitness as a guardian. The report painted a picture of a desperate man whose attachment to his valuable bull was compromising his ability to protect the child in his care. "Mr. Harrison," said Jennifer Walsh, the CPS investigator assigned to the case, as she sat across from Bill in the hospital's family consultation room. "Dr. Caldwell has expressed serious concerns about Emma's safety on your ranch. He's documented several incidents where she's been in close proximity to a bull weighing over 1,000 pounds. I'm sure you can understand our concern." Bill felt the walls closing in around him, the same helpless sensation he had experienced during his malpractice lawsuit years earlier, the feeling of being trapped in a system that refused to see beyond its own rigid protocols. That bull has never harmed Emma. If anything, Thunder has protected her. He alerts us before seizures occur, giving us time to prepare. "Mr. Harrison, with all due respect, you're not a medical doctor," Walsh replied, her tone professionally sympathetic but inflexible. "Dr. Caldwell is one of the most respected pediatric emergency physicians in Central Texas. When he tells us that a child is in danger, we have to take that assessment seriously." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Patricia Hernandez, a pediatric neurologist who had been called in to consult on Emma's case. Unlike Caldwell, Dr. Hernandez approached the situation with scientific curiosity rather than predetermined conclusions. I've been reviewing Emma's medical records," she said, settling into a chair beside Bill. "Her seizure frequency has actually decreased since she came to stay with you, Mr. Harrison. The episodes are more severe when they occur, but they're happening less often. That's an unusual pattern that warrants investigation." Walsh looked surprised. Dr. Caldwell indicated that her condition was deteriorating under Mr. Harrison's care. "Dr. Caldwell's assessment focuses primarily on the acute episodes," Dr. Hernandez replied carefully. "But seizure management involves looking at the broader pattern of the condition. Emma's overall stability has improved, which is remarkable given the stress of her recent placement changes." The discussion was interrupted by a commotion in the hallway, raised voices, and the sound of security personnel being summoned. Through the consultation room's window, they could see Thunder in the hospital parking lot, having somehow escaped from the animal control transport vehicle. The bull was standing beneath Emma's hospital room window, his massive head raised toward the third floor, emitting the deep, mournful calls that had become his signature response to Emma's distress. "This is exactly what I was talking about," Caldwell announced as he burst into the consultation room, his face flushed with vindication and anxiety. "That animal has broken containment and is now creating a dangerous situation in a hospital parking lot. This proves my point about the unpredictable nature of these animals." But Dr. Hernandez was studying Thunder's behavior with professional interest. "Has anyone considered that the bull's agitation might indicate that Emma's condition is changing? Some animals demonstrate remarkable sensitivity to physiological changes that our monitoring equipment might miss." As if summoned by her words, a nurse appeared in the doorway. "Doctor, Emma's showing signs of increased neural activity. Her EEG patterns are shifting, and she's beginning to respond to verbal stimuli." The group rushed to Emma's room where they found her eyes fluttering open for the first time since her arrival at the hospital. Her first word, spoken in a voice hoarse from medical intubation, was "Thunder." From 3 floors below, the bull's answering call echoed through the hospital grounds. Dr. Caldwell stared at the monitors displaying Emma's improving vital signs, his worldview cracking under the weight of evidence that contradicted everything he believed about animal behavior and medical science. But instead of reconsidering his position, he doubled down on his fears. "This is clearly a dangerous attachment," he declared, though his voice lacked its earlier conviction. "The child has developed an unhealthy dependence on an unpredictable animal. For her own psychological well-being, this relationship needs to be severed immediately." Over the following weeks, as Emma recovered from her severe seizure episode, the battle lines were drawn with devastating clarity. Dr. Caldwell used his position and reputation to build a case against Thunder's presence in Emma's life, documenting every instance where the bull's protective behavior could be reframed as potential danger. He cited statistics about cattle-related injuries, presented case studies of unpredictable animal behavior, and painted a picture of a child whose safety was being compromised by the misguided sentiment of her guardian. The financial pressure on Bill intensified as legal fees mounted alongside Emma's medical bills. The ranch's creditors, sensing vulnerability, accelerated their collection efforts. The bank issued a final notice of foreclosure, giving Bill 30 days to settle his accounts or lose the property that had been in his family for 3 generations. The cruelest irony was that Thunder himself represented the solution to their financial crisis. Several potential buyers had expressed interest in purchasing the prize bull, offering amounts that would not only save the ranch but provide for Emma's ongoing medical care. But selling Thunder would mean destroying the very relationship that seemed to be keeping Emma stable. Emma, now back at the ranch but under the watchful eye of court-appointed monitors, sensed the tension surrounding her future. Her seizures began increasing in frequency again, a development that Caldwell pointed to as evidence of the stress caused by her unnatural attachment to Thunder. The situation reached a breaking point when Mrs. Walsh arrived at the ranch with an ultimatum. Either Thunder would be removed from the property within 72 hours, or Emma would be placed in a medical foster facility in Austin where she could receive appropriate care without the complications of exotic animal exposure. That evening, as Bill sat on his porch watching Emma read quietly under the oak tree while Thunder grazed nearby, he faced the most impossible choice of his life. Save the ranch and provide for Emma's future by selling Thunder, or fight to preserve their unconventional family and risk losing everything, including Emma herself. The answer came to him as he watched Thunder lift his massive head and move with sudden urgency toward Emma's reading spot. The bull's alert behavior triggered Emma's own recognition of an approaching seizure, giving her time to prepare and position herself safely. As Thunder settled his enormous bulk nearby, providing both physical and emotional support during Emma's medical crisis, Bill realized that some bonds transcended financial considerations and bureaucratic protocols. Whatever the cost, he would not be the one to break the connection that had already saved Emma's life more times than anyone could count. The confrontation that would change everything began on a scorching Tuesday morning in late September, when the tension that had been building for weeks finally erupted into open conflict. Bill had awakened before dawn to find Thunder pacing restlessly along the fence line, his massive frame silhouetted against the pre-dawn darkness, emitting low, anxious calls that seemed to vibrate through the very ground beneath the ranch house. Emma appeared on the porch still in her pajamas, drawn by some instinct that had learned to interpret Thunder's warnings with an accuracy that defied medical explanation. "He's telling me something's wrong," she said quietly, her small hand gripping the porch railing as she studied the bull's agitated behavior. "But it's not about me this time." The answer came 30 minutes later when 3 vehicles turned onto the ranch's gravel drive, kicking up clouds of dust that hung in the still morning air like harbingers of disaster. The lead car bore the familiar seal of Child Protective Services, followed by an animal control truck equipped with a heavy-duty trailer, and finally a black sedan that Bill recognized as belonging to Dr. Marcus Caldwell. Mrs. Walsh emerged from the CPS vehicle carrying an official-looking folder, her expression a mixture of professional determination and personal regret. Behind her, 2 animal control officers began unloading restraint equipment while Dr. Caldwell stood at a careful distance, his eyes fixed on Thunder with the wary attention of someone confronting a long-feared enemy. "Mr. Harrison," Mrs. Walsh called out, her voice carrying the weight of bureaucratic authority, "we have a court order for the immediate removal of the bull known as Thunder from these premises. Additionally, Emma Rose McCarthy is to be placed in temporary protective custody pending a full investigation of her living conditions." Bill felt the world tilt beneath his feet as he processed the magnitude of what was happening. "You can't do this," he said, his voice thick with desperation. "Emma's condition has been stable. Thunder hasn't harmed anyone. This is her home." "Mr. Harrison, please don't make this more difficult than necessary," Mrs. Walsh replied, though her professional composure couldn't quite mask her own discomfort with the situation. "Dr. Caldwell has provided compelling evidence that Emma's continued exposure to this animal represents an unacceptable risk to her safety and psychological well-being." Dr. Caldwell stepped forward, his medical bag clutched like a shield against his chest. "Mr. Harrison, I understand your attachment to the animal, but we cannot continue to enable a situation that compromises a child's welfare. Emma needs proper medical supervision in a controlled environment, not continued exposure to unpredictable livestock." As if sensing the threat to his small charge, Thunder approached the fence with deliberate steps, his massive presence commanding attention from everyone present. The animal control officers exchanged nervous glances, clearly re-evaluating their approach to restraining a bull of Thunder's size and obvious intelligence. Emma, who had been watching the proceedings with the solemn intensity of someone far older than her 6 years, suddenly stepped off the porch and walked toward the fence where Thunder waited. "You can't take him away," she said, her voice carrying a clarity that cut through the morning tension. "He takes care of me. When the scary feelings come, he tells me so I can be safe." "Sweetheart," Mrs. Walsh said gently, approaching Emma with the practiced caution of someone accustomed to dealing with traumatized children. "Thunder is just an animal. He can't really protect you from seizures. The doctors have special medicine and machines that will take much better care of you than any bull could." Emma's response revealed a wisdom that shocked the adults present. "The doctors didn't know I was still alive when everyone thought I was dead," she said simply. "But Thunder knew. He always knows." Dr. Caldwell's face flushed with anger at what he perceived as a child's fantasy being used to undermine medical authority. "That's exactly the kind of magical thinking that makes this situation so dangerous," he declared. Emma is developing an unhealthy dependence on an animal rather than learning to trust proper medical care. The first attempt to remove Thunder from the pasture revealed the depth of the bond that had formed between the bull and his small protector. As the animal control officers approached with their restraint equipment, Thunder positioned himself directly in front of Emma, his massive bulk creating an immovable barrier between the child and the approaching officials. "He's not being aggressive," Bill observed, studying Thunder's body language with the trained eye of someone who had spent decades working with large animals. "He's protecting her. Look at his posture. Ears forward, not back. He's alert, but not threatening." The lead animal control officer, a weathered man named Frank Rodriguez, who had worked with livestock for over 20 years, nodded in reluctant agreement. "I've never seen defensive behavior quite like this," he admitted. "Usually when we're dealing with protective animals, there's obvious aggression, pawing, charging, vocalizations. This bull is just standing guard." Dr. Caldwell's patience with the careful approach finally snapped. "This is exactly why these animals are dangerous," he exploded, his carefully maintained professional demeanor cracking to reveal the trauma that lay beneath. "They seem calm until something triggers them, and then they kill. I've seen it happen." The raw pain in Caldwell's voice stopped the conversation, revealing glimpses of a personal tragedy that had shaped his absolute conviction about the danger of large animals around children. But before anyone could respond to his outburst, Thunder suddenly raised his massive head, his attention shifting from the officials to Emma with the focused intensity that everyone present had learned to recognize. "She's going to have a seizure," Bill announced, already moving toward Emma as Thunder's alert behavior escalated into the urgent vocalizations that preceded Emma's most severe episodes. "That's impossible," Dr. Caldwell protested. "There are no visible symptoms." Animals don't predict medical events. But Emma was already responding to Thunder's warning, moving with practiced efficiency toward the designated safe area beneath the oak tree where soft grass and careful positioning would minimize injury if she fell. Thunder followed at a careful distance, positioning himself to provide both physical and emotional support during the medical crisis that was about to unfold. The seizure that struck Emma was one of the most severe anyone present had witnessed, lasting nearly 10 minutes and requiring the emergency medication that Dr. Caldwell administered with obvious reluctance. Throughout the episode, Thunder maintained his protective vigil, his deep, rhythmic vocalizations providing a steady counterpoint to Emma's distress. When Emma finally began to recover, her first conscious act was to reach toward Thunder, seeking comfort from the massive presence that had become her anchor in the terrifying world of uncontrolled neural activity. The bull responded by gently lowering his enormous head until Emma could rest her small hand against his warm forehead. "How did he know?" Mrs. Walsh asked quietly, her professional skepticism shaken by what she had witnessed. She showed no signs. Even Dr. Caldwell didn't detect anything. Dr. Caldwell, pale and visibly shaken by the demonstration of Thunder's abilities, struggled to maintain his position in the face of evidence that contradicted his fundamental beliefs. "Animals can sometimes detect chemical changes that humans miss," he admitted grudgingly. "But that doesn't make them safe around children. If anything, it proves how unpredictable and potentially dangerous they can be." The stalemate continued for hours, with Thunder refusing to allow the animal control officers close enough to attempt restraint, and Emma growing increasingly distressed at the prospect of separation from her protector. As the Texas sun climbed toward its merciless peak, tempers frayed and positions hardened on both sides of the conflict. The breaking point came when Dr. Caldwell, frustrated by the lack of progress and increasingly agitated by Thunder's presence, made a fateful decision that would transform the entire situation. Pulling a tranquilizer gun from his medical bag, standard equipment for emergency situations involving uncooperative patients, He announced his intention to sedate Thunder so that removal could proceed safely. "You can't sedate him without proper veterinary supervision," Bill protested, his alarm evident. "Thunder's weight, his stress levels, the heat, there are too many variables. You could kill him." "I'm a medical doctor," Caldwell replied curtly, checking the dosage on the tranquilizer dart. "I'm perfectly capable of calculating appropriate sedation for a large mammal." But as Caldwell raised the tranquilizer gun, Emma's distress triggered another seizure, this one even more severe than the previous episode. Thunder's immediate response was to position himself protectively over the convulsing child, creating a living shield that made any attempt to sedate him impossibly dangerous. The crisis that followed would force everyone present to confront the fundamental question of what truly mattered: rigid adherence to protocol and procedure, or the undeniable evidence of a bond that transcended conventional understanding and had already saved a child's life more times than anyone could count. The tragedy that shattered their fragile world began with a decision born from desperation and miscalculation. Dr. Caldwell, watching Emma's seizure intensify beneath Thunder's protective bulk, made a choice that would haunt him for the rest of his career. Despite Bill's warnings about the dangers of sedating a stressed animal in extreme heat, Caldwell fired the tranquilizer dart, striking Thunder in the shoulder as the bull maintained his vigil over the convulsing child. The sedative, designed for a calm animal under controlled conditions, reacted catastrophically with Thunder's elevated stress hormones and the brutal Texas heat that had pushed temperatures above 105 degrees. Within minutes, the massive bull began showing signs of severe distress, labored breathing, unsteady movements, and a dangerous drop in coordination that made his protective positioning over Emma increasingly unstable. "Get him away from her now!" Caldwell shouted, his medical instincts warring with the growing realization that his intervention had created a far more dangerous situation than the one he had attempted to resolve. Thunder, fighting the effects of the sedative with stubborn determination, refused to abandon his post beside Emma even as his massive legs began to buckle. Bill watched in horror as the bull's protective instincts battled against the drug coursing through his system, creating a nightmarish scenario where Thunder's devotion to Emma was becoming the very thing that might harm her. Frank Rodriguez, the animal control officer, made the desperate decision to use his cattle prod to force Thunder away from Emma's convulsing form. The electrical shock that struck Thunder's flank sent the already compromised bull into a panic response that overrode both his training and his protective instincts. For the first time since Bill had rescued him from his abusive previous owner, Thunder became truly dangerous. The bull's massive hooves trampled dangerously close to Emma as he stumbled backward, the combination of sedative, heat stress, and electrical shock creating a perfect storm of neurological confusion. Mrs. Walsh screamed as she dove to pull Emma away from Thunder's unsteady path, but the child's seizure made her a dead weight that was difficult to move quickly. It was Bill who finally managed to reach Emma, scooping her unconscious form away from Thunder's proximity just as the bull collapsed onto the exact spot where she had been lying. The massive animal hit the ground with a sickening thud that seemed to shake the very earth, his labored breathing creating clouds of dust with each exhale. Dr. Caldwell, his face ashen with the recognition of what his actions had precipitated, rushed to check Thunder's vital signs while Bill cradled Emma's still seizing form. The irony was devastating. In trying to separate the child from her protector, they had created the very danger Caldwell had claimed to prevent. "His respiratory system is shutting down," Caldwell announced, his voice hollow with professional defeat. "The sedative, combined with the heat stress and shock from the cattle prod, it's more than his system can handle." Thunder's breathing became increasingly shallow as his massive body struggled against the toxic combination of chemicals and stress. His intelligent eyes, which had watched over Emma with such devoted attention for months, began to lose their focus as the life slowly ebbed from his enormous frame. Emma's seizure finally subsided, but she remained unconscious as Bill held her against his chest, feeling as if he was watching everything that mattered in his world crumble simultaneously. Thunder, the gentle giant who had become their guardian and protector, was dying just feet away, while Emma lay unnaturally still in his arms. "Oh, we need to get Emma to the hospital immediately," Dr. Caldwell said, his medical training taking over despite his personal anguish. "Her vital signs are unstable, and without proper monitoring equipment, we can't assess the damage from this prolonged episode." The ambulance ride to Austin General Hospital passed in a haze of sirens and medical procedures. Emma remained unresponsive, her small body connected to monitoring equipment that showed increasingly concerning patterns of brain activity. Dr. Caldwell, riding beside the gurney, found himself confronting the possibility that his intervention had cost not only Thunder's life, but potentially Emma's as well. At the hospital, Emma was rushed into intensive care while Bill waited helplessly in the family consultation room, surrounded by the sterile institutional environment that felt like a prison after the open spaces of the ranch. Hours passed without significant change in Emma's condition, her brain activity remaining at dangerously low levels that suggested severe neurological damage. Dr. Patricia Hernandez, the pediatric neurologist who had previously advocated for a more holistic approach to Emma's care, arrived to find a heartbroken father and a colleague whose professional judgment had been compromised by personal trauma. The EEG readings showed minimal brain activity, suggesting that Emma had suffered catastrophic damage during her prolonged seizure episode. "I'm sorry, Bill," Dr. Hernandez said gently, her words weighted with the gravity of medical certainty. "The brain damage appears to be extensive. Even if Emma regains consciousness, it's unlikely she'll recover significant cognitive function." The words hit Bill like physical blows, each syllable driving him deeper into despair. The vibrant, intelligent child who had brought such unexpected joy to his life was gone, replaced by a fragile shell whose survival was far from guaranteed. And Thunder, the magnificent bull who had devoted his life to protecting her, had died in agony because of one man's prejudice and fear. Dr. Caldwell, standing in the doorway of the consultation room, heard Dr. Hernandez's assessment with the crushing weight of personal responsibility. His attempt to save Emma from imaginary danger had created real tragedy that destroyed everything he had claimed to protect. "The family should consider end-of-life planning," Dr. Hernandez continued, her professional compassion evident in every carefully chosen word. "Emma's brain activity is insufficient to sustain normal function. Even with artificial support, her quality of life would be severely compromised." Bill stared at the medical reports spread across the table, seeing not charts and graphs, but the end of every dream he had harbored for their unconventional family. Emma would never grow up to become the veterinarian she had dreamed of being. She would never again laugh at Thunder's gentle antics or find comfort in his protective presence. The irony was devastating. In the name of protecting Emma from Thunder, they had destroyed the very bond that had kept her stable and happy. The bull who had never harmed her had died trying to protect her from the very people who claimed to have her best interests at heart. Mrs. Walsh arrived at the hospital that evening to find Bill sitting beside Emma's bed, holding her motionless hand while machines breathed for her and monitored the faint electrical activity that was all that remained of her vibrant spirit. The social worker's earlier confidence in the system's ability to protect vulnerable children had been shattered by the day's events. "Mr. Harrison," she said quietly, her voice stripped of its usual bureaucratic authority, "I want you to know that we're conducting a full investigation into today's incident. The decisions that led to this outcome will be thoroughly reviewed." Bill didn't look up from Emma's pale face as he responded, "Your investigation won't bring back Thunder. It won't give Emma back the protector who kept her safe when your system failed her." The words hung in the air between them, carrying the weight of accusations that Mrs. Walsh couldn't deny. In their zeal to follow protocol and eliminate perceived risks, they had created a tragedy that proper understanding and patience might have prevented. As the night deepened and Emma's condition remained unchanged, Bill began to accept the unthinkable reality that he would soon have to make decisions about withdrawing life support from the child he had grown to love as his own daughter. The ranch that had been their sanctuary was already lost to foreclosure. And now, Emma, the bright light who had given his life new purpose, was slipping away as well. In the quiet of the hospital room, surrounded by the mechanical sounds of artificial life support, Bill grieved not only for Emma's condition, but for the magnificent bull who had died trying to protect her from the very people who should have been her allies. The funeral preparations began 3 days after Dr. Hernandez reluctantly signed the death certificate, her hand trembling as she completed the paperwork that officially declared Emma Rose McCarthy deceased at 3:47 p.m. on September 28th. The small white coffin, donated by a local funeral home whose director had been moved by the tragic circumstances, sat in the preparation room while Bill made arrangements that no parent should ever have to contemplate. But even in death, controversy followed Emma and the memory of her devoted protector. Dr. Caldwell, racked with guilt over his role in the tragedy, had insisted on conducting the final examination personally, as if his medical expertise could somehow atone for the catastrophic errors in judgment that had led to this moment. His assessment was swift and definitive. Massive brain damage from prolonged seizure activity, complicated by heat stroke and system failure. What Dr. Caldwell didn't know, couldn't have known given his limited understanding of rare neurological conditions, was that Emma's brain had responded to the trauma by entering a state so profound that it mimicked death itself. The cataleptic condition, triggered by the perfect storm of her epilepsy, extreme stress, and the loss of Thunder's stabilizing presence, had slowed her vital signs to levels that standard hospital equipment couldn't detect. Meanwhile, at the impound facility where Thunder's body had been taken pending necropsy, a different kind of mystery was unfolding. Jake Morrison, the facility's veterinarian, had been puzzled by the condition of the bull's carcass. Despite having witnessed Thunder's apparent death at the ranch, Morrison's examination revealed something that challenged the official narrative. "The sedative levels in his blood are concerning," Morrison explained to his assistant as they completed their examination. "But they're not lethal. This bull should have recovered from the tranquilizer dose within 6 to 8 hours, even accounting for the heat stress." Morrison's findings suggested that Thunder hadn't died from the sedative overdose as everyone had assumed. Instead, the massive bull appeared to have suffered a stress-induced cardiac episode, essentially a broken heart brought on by his inability to protect Emma during her crisis. The necropsy revealed a heart that had simply stopped, not from chemical toxicity, but from what could only be described as emotional trauma. But the most startling discovery came when Morrison attempted to move Thunder's body for transport to the rendering facility. The bull's massive frame, which should have exhibited the rigor mortis expected after 3 days, instead showed signs of minimal muscular tension and surprisingly normal body temperature for a deceased animal of his size. "This doesn't make sense," Morrison muttered, rechecking his instruments. "I'm detecting a faint heartbeat. It's maybe 6 beats per minute, but it's there." The veterinarian's training told him that what he was observing was impossible. Animals of Thunder's size and condition don't survive 3 days without food, water, or apparent circulation. But his instruments were consistent, and Morrison had learned over 20 years of practice not to dismiss evidence simply because it challenged conventional understanding. At Hillcrest Cemetery, the funeral preparations continued with the tragic symmetry of coincidence. Emma's service was scheduled for the same morning that Thunder's body was to be transported for disposal, creating a poignant parallel between the child and her protector, who had been separated by human intervention but would be reunited in death. The community response to Emma's death had been profound and complex. Many residents felt genuine grief for the loss of the brave little girl who had captured their hearts, while others experienced guilt over their failure to support the unconventional family that Bill and Emma had represented. Dr. Caldwell had taken indefinite leave from his position at the hospital, his colleagues whispering about the toll that Emma's case had taken on his mental health. Bill Harrison, preparing to bury the child who had given his life new meaning, moved through the funeral arrangements with the mechanical precision of someone whose spirit had been broken. The ranch was already in foreclosure proceedings, and he faced the prospect of starting over at 45 with nothing but memories of what might have been. Pastor Williams, who had agreed to conduct Emma's service despite the controversial circumstances surrounding her death, struggled with his own questions about divine justice and human fallibility. In his 30 years of ministry, he had never encountered a situation where good intentions and institutional protocols had combined to create such devastating consequences. The morning of the funeral dawned clear and surprisingly cool for late September in Texas, with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of wildflowers across the cemetery grounds. As mourners began gathering around Emma's gravesite, located near a grove of oak trees that provided shade from the still intense sun, an unexpected commotion erupted at the cemetery's main entrance. Jake Morrison had arrived with Thunder's body in a livestock transport trailer, intending to make a brief stop at the cemetery before continuing to the rendering facility. But as the trailer approached Emma's burial site, something extraordinary occurred that would challenge everything the assembled mourners thought they understood about life, death, and the bonds that transcend both. The massive trailer began rocking violently, accompanied by the sound of hooves against metal and a bellowing that echoed across the cemetery grounds with haunting familiarity. Thunder, somehow revived from his death-like state, was fighting to escape from his mobile prison with a determination that spoke of urgent purpose. "That's impossible," whispered Dr. Hernandez, who had attended the funeral out of personal respect for Bill and professional guilt over her role in Emma's final diagnosis. "I confirmed that bull's death myself 3 days ago." Morrison, pale with shock at the implications of what was happening, quickly released the trailer's restraints. Thunder burst forth with the power and majesty that had made him a prize-breeding bull, but his focus was singular and undeniable. He was seeking Emma with the same protective instinct that had defined their relationship in life. The funeral attendees scattered in panic as Thunder approached the small white coffin with deliberate steps, his massive hooves creating deep impressions in the soft cemetery soil. But those who looked closely could see that the bull's demeanor wasn't aggressive or wild. It was purposeful, almost reverent, as if he understood the solemnity of the moment. When Thunder reached Emma's coffin, he positioned himself exactly as he had during her seizures, his enormous body creating a protective barrier while his intelligent eyes fixed on the white container that held his small charge. The bull's vocalizations, however, weren't the gentle rumblings he had used to comfort Emma during her medical episodes. Instead, Thunder was producing the urgent, alert calls that had preceded her most severe seizures. "He's not grieving," Dr. Mitchell observed, her veterinary training overriding her shock at Thunder's miraculous revival. "He's alerting." The same behavior he showed when Emma was in medical distress. Bill, torn between disbelief at Thunder's apparent resurrection and confusion about the bull's behavior, approached the coffin cautiously. "Thunder, she's gone," he said softly, his voice breaking with renewed grief. "You couldn't save her this time." But Thunder's alerting behavior intensified, his massive head turning toward Bill with an intensity that demanded attention. The bull's vocalizations became more urgent, more insistent, as if he was trying to communicate something that transcended the normal boundaries between human and animal understanding. Dr. Morrison, whose necropsy findings had already raised questions about Thunder's supposed death, stepped forward with growing realization. Mr. Harrison, if Thunder was in the same type of cataleptic state that sometimes occurs in humans with severe neurological trauma, and if Emma's condition triggered a similar response due to their extraordinary bond. He couldn't finish the sentence, but the implication hung in the air like a prayer barely dared to be spoken. If Thunder's revival was possible, if the bull's current alerting behavior meant what it had always meant before, then perhaps the greatest tragedy of all was about to be revealed as a profound misunderstanding. Pastor Williams, his faith tested by the morning's extraordinary events, found himself facing a decision that would either confirm or challenge everything he believed about divine intervention and miraculous possibilities. "Open the coffin," he said quietly, his voice carrying the authority of someone speaking from deep conviction rather than institutional protocol. "That's not possible," protested the funeral director, clearly overwhelmed by the unprecedented situation unfolding in his cemetery. "There are health regulations, legal requirements." But Bill Harrison, looking into Thunder's intelligent eyes and remembering every instance when the bull's alerting had preceded Emma's medical crises, made the decision that would change everything. "Open it," he said firmly, his voice stronger than it had been in days. "If Thunder says she needs help, then she needs help." As the funeral director reluctantly began removing the coffin's securing latches, Thunder's alerting behavior reached a crescendo that echoed across the cemetery grounds. The massive bull was practically dancing with urgency, his vocalizations creating a symphony of hope that made even the most skeptical observers question their assumptions about the finality of death. The moment the coffin lid was raised, revealing Emma's peaceful form dressed in her favorite blue dress with butterfly embroidery, Thunder's behavior shifted from urgent alerting to gentle protection. The bull lowered his massive head until his warm breath touched Emma's pale cheek, and his vocalizations softened to the rhythmic rumbling that had always comforted her during her most difficult moments. And in that instant, Emma Rose McCarthy drew her first conscious breath in 3 days, her eyes fluttering open to find herself surrounded by the familiar presence of her devoted protector and the shocked faces of those who had been preparing to say their final goodbyes. The collective gasp that rose from the cemetery grounds seemed to hang in the still morning air as Emma's eyes opened, unfocused at first but gradually settling on the familiar sight of Thunder's massive form positioned protectively beside her coffin. Her first word, spoken in a voice hoarse from days of silence, was barely audible but unmistakably clear. "Thunder." The bull's responding rumble of recognition sent shock waves through the assembled mourners, many of whom fell to their knees in spontaneous prayer, while others stood frozen in disbelief at what they were witnessing. Dr. Hernandez pushed through the crowd, her medical training overriding her astonishment as she reached for Emma's wrist to check for a pulse that everyone had assumed was gone forever. "Her heart rate is weak but steady," she announced, her voice trembling with professional excitement and personal vindication. "Body temperature is dangerously low, but she's definitely alive. We need emergency transport to the hospital immediately." Bill Harrison, tears streaming down his weathered face, leaned over the coffin to gently stroke Emma's pale cheek. "Hey there, sweetheart," he whispered, his voice breaking with emotions too complex to name. "Thunder knew you were still with us. He never gave up on you." Emma's small hand moved with tremendous effort toward Thunder's lowered head, her fingers barely managing to touch the warm fur between his ears. The simple gesture sent another wave of amazement through the crowd as they realized they were witnessing not just a medical miracle, but the reunion of two souls whose bond had transcended even the apparent finality of death. Pastor Williams, his voice thick with wonder and renewed faith, began leading the gathering in a prayer of thanksgiving that transformed Emma's funeral into an unprecedented celebration of life and divine intervention. The words echoed across the cemetery as emergency vehicles summoned by Dr. Hernandez's urgent call began arriving with sirens wailing. But even as paramedics rushed to stabilize Emma for transport, the broader implications of what had occurred began to sink in for those who had played roles in the tragedy that nearly claimed both Emma and Thunder's lives. Dr. Marcus Caldwell, who had arrived at the cemetery, hoping to find some measure of peace by attending Emma's funeral, stood at the edge of the crowd with his face buried in his hands, overwhelmed by the magnitude of his errors in judgment. The next several hours unfolded in a blur of medical activity as Emma was rushed to Austin General Hospital for comprehensive evaluation. Thunder, despite having been declared dead 3 days earlier, was transported alongside her in a specially arranged livestock trailer that followed the ambulance. The extraordinary circumstances of their revival had prompted hospital administration to waive normal protocols prohibiting large animals on medical premises. Dr. Eleanor Weinstock, the hospital's chief of medicine, assembled an unprecedented team of specialists to examine both Emma and Thunder, seeking scientific explanations for what appeared to be a double resurrection. The initial findings challenged everything the medical team thought they understood about death, consciousness, and the limits of the human-animal bond. Emma's brain activity shows patterns consistent with emergence from a profound cataleptic state, Dr. Weinstock explained to the assembled team. Her vital signs were so suppressed that standard monitoring equipment couldn't detect them. It's an extremely rare condition, documented in fewer than a dozen cases worldwide. Jake Morrison, the veterinarian who had discovered Thunder's minimal vital signs, provided similar findings about the bull's condition. Thunder appears to have entered a state of suspended animation triggered by extreme emotional trauma. His metabolic processes slowed to levels that mimicked death but never actually ceased entirely. The scientific explanations, while fascinating to the medical community, seemed almost mundane compared to the profound emotional truth that had driven both Emma and Thunder to survive against impossible odds. Their bond had sustained them through a crisis that should have been fatal, creating a living testament to the power of love and loyalty that transcended species boundaries. Meanwhile, the investigation into the events that had led to the near tragedy was proceeding with the thoroughness that such an unprecedented case demanded. Dr. Caldwell's role in precipitating the crisis through his unauthorized use of tranquilizer and his prejudice against Thunder was under intense scrutiny by both hospital administration and state medical boards. Mrs. Jennifer Walsh, the Child Protective Services investigator, whose adherence to protocol had initiated the chain of events, found herself questioning fundamental assumptions about what constituted appropriate care for vulnerable children. The evidence was overwhelming that Emma had been safer and more stable under Bill's care with Thunder's protection than she had ever been in institutional settings. The legal ramifications were complex and far-reaching. The hospital faced potential malpractice suits for the premature death declaration, while Child Protective Services confronted uncomfortable questions about their decision-making processes. But for Bill Harrison, the most important outcome was the gradual recognition that his unconventional family deserved protection rather than persecution. Emma's recovery progressed slowly but steadily over the following weeks. Her cognitive functions, preserved by the cataleptic state that had protected her brain during the crisis, returned gradually as her body recovered from the trauma of extended unconsciousness. Thunder, cleared by veterinary examination and behavioral assessment, was permitted to remain near Emma's hospital room, his presence providing the stability that traditional medical interventions had failed to achieve. The story of Emma and Thunder's survival spread far beyond the borders of Texas, capturing international attention as evidence of the profound connections possible between humans and animals. Research institutions requested permission to study their case, while animal welfare organizations pointed to their bond as proof of the intelligence and emotional capacity of livestock species. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the veterinarian who had long recognized Thunder's extraordinary abilities, was invited to lead a groundbreaking research program studying animal-assisted medical intervention. Her work with Emma and Thunder would eventually contribute to new protocols for incorporating specially trained animals into pediatric care, particularly for children with neurological conditions. But perhaps the most significant change came in the transformation of Dr. Marcus Caldwell himself. The physician who had allowed personal tragedy to cloud his professional judgment found himself confronting the origins of his prejudice against large animals. With the support of grief counseling and the shocking evidence of Thunder's gentleness and intelligence, Caldwell began the difficult process of healing from his son's death and learning to see animals as potential allies rather than inevitable threats. The reconciliation between Caldwell and the Harrison family was gradual and deeply moving. When the doctor finally approached Emma's hospital room, it was with humility and genuine remorse for the pain his actions had caused. Emma, with the wisdom that seemed to come naturally to children who have faced extraordinary challenges, accepted his apology with simple grace. "Thunder doesn't hold grudges," she told Dr. Caldwell during one of his visits. "He says you were just scared, like I get scared sometimes during seizures, but being scared doesn't make you bad." The financial crisis that had threatened to destroy Bill's ranch was resolved through an unexpected combination of sources. The hospital's settlement for the medical errors provided immediate relief, while a crowdfunding campaign inspired by Emma and Thunder's story raised additional funds for Emma's ongoing care and the ranch's preservation. More importantly, the ranch itself was transformed into something greater than Bill had ever imagined. With the support of Dr. Mitchell's research program and partnerships with local medical institutions, Harrison Ranch became a pioneering center for animal-assisted therapy and medical intervention, with Thunder serving as the gentle giant who helped other children find comfort and stability in their own medical journeys. 6 months after their miraculous revival, Emma and Thunder had become symbols of hope for families facing seemingly impossible challenges. Their story inspired legislation protecting the rights of families to pursue unconventional but effective medical support, while also establishing new standards for the training and certification of medical assistance animals. As Bill watched Emma reading quietly under the old oak tree while Thunder grazed nearby, his massive presence a comforting constant in their restored world, he reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. They had faced death and emerged stronger, challenged a system that couldn't understand their bond and forced it to evolve, and proven that love truly could conquer even the most impossible circumstances. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the pasture as Emma looked up from her book to find Thunder watching her with the devoted attention that had saved her life more times than anyone could count. In that moment, surrounded by the peace they had fought so hard to preserve, all 3 members of their unconventional family understood that some bonds are too strong for even death to break. Dear friends, Emma and Thunder's miraculous story reminds us that the most profound connections in our lives often come from the most unexpected places. At our age, we understand something precious that younger generations are still learning, that love doesn't always arrive in the packages we expect. Sometimes it comes with 4 hooves and a gentle heart. Sometimes it requires us to look beyond what society tells us is normal or safe. Emma, a broken little girl, and Thunder, a misunderstood giant, found in each other what the rest of the world couldn't provide: unconditional acceptance and fierce protection. Their bond teaches us that it's never too late for second chances, that healing can happen at any age, and that the deepest truths often challenge our comfortable assumptions. In our golden years, we know the value of loyalty, the power of patience, and the miracle of simply being present for someone who needs us. Like thunder standing guard over Emma's coffin, refusing to give up when everyone else had lost hope, we too can be that unwavering presence in someone's life. The question isn't whether we're too old to make a difference, it's whether we're brave enough to love without limits. Share with us who has been your thunder in life, that unexpected guardian who refused to give up on you, and whose life could you protect and nurture today just by refusing to walk away.